Welcome back to Home Field Trivia. Thanks for joining us for our Atlanta Falcons quiz. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more sports quiz content. Leave us a comment below, and let's get started. The Atlanta Falcons joined the NFL as an expansion team in 1966. That is true. The Atlanta Falcons have won a Super Bowl. That is false. The Falcons' first head coach was Norb Hecker. That is true. The team's first ever draft pick was Tommy Nobis. That is true. The Falcons' first playoff appearance was in 1978. That is true. Matt Ryan won the NFL MVP award in 2016. That is true. The Falcons lost Super Bowl 51 after leading 28-3 against the Patriots. That is true. The Falcons were originally based in Birmingham, Alabama. That is false. Arthur Blank is the co-founder of the Home Depot and owner of the Falcons. That is true. The Falcons' home stadium before Mercedes-Benz Stadium was the Georgia Dome. That is true. The Falcons have always played in the NFC South Division. That is false. Deion Sanders began his Hall of Fame career with the Falcons. That is true. The Falcons have had only 2 head coaches in franchise history. That is false. Michael Vick was the first quarterback ever drafted first overall by the Falcons. That is true. The Falcons' first ever playoff win came in 1978 against the Philadelphia Eagles. That is true. The Falcons' all-time leading rusher is Gerald Riggs. That is true. Julio Jones was drafted by the Falcons in the first round in 2011. That is true. The Falcons' mascot is named Freddie Falcon. That is true. The city of Atlanta has hosted multiple Super Bowls, including one at the Georgia Dome. That is true. The Falcons once drafted Brett Favre, but traded him after one season. That is true. Brett Favre started several games for the Falcons before being traded. That is false. The Falcons reached Super Bowl 33 in the 1998 season under coach Dan Reeves. That is true. The Falcons defeated the Patriots in Super Bowl 51. That is false. Matt Ryan is the franchise's all-time leader in passing yards and touchdowns. That is true. The Falcons have placed the number 60 in the Ring of Honor for linebacker Tommy Nobis. That is true. Falcons have appeared in exactly 2 NFC Championship games. That is false. The Falcons' first ever win came against the New York Giants. That is true. Arthur Smith became the head coach of the Falcons in 2021. That is true. The Falcons have never had a player win the Defensive Rookie of the Year award. That is false. The Falcons' 1998 NFC Championship victory was over the Minnesota Vikings. That is true. Thanks for joining us for our Atlanta Falcons quiz. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more content, leave us a comment below, and join us again next time.